The Hoplite story begins on the mainland of ancient Greece. For hundreds of years, villages fought and squabbled among themselves. As they fought, they formed alliances, and as they formed alliances, the villages grew into bigger communities called city-states. The city-states of Greece included Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and the most famous and influential of all, Athens. The citizens of these city-states were free men who created a vibrant culture of markets, political life, religion, and philosophy. All of this was possible because they were farmers. The Greeks were a settled agricultural society based on the idea of private property. They owned small holdings of between 5 and 15 acres, and they earned their living from growing fruit, cereals, and rearing sheep. And they were successful. It was the surplus of crops and food that enabled their culture to develop. When threatened, the farmers would band together and fight to protect their property and their way of life. Their most common enemy was a neighboring city-state. Although the city-states shared a common culture, they often quarreled. Almost every year, arguments arose over land. There would be a boundary dispute, and then there would be battle. And a very special style of warfare developed from these local quarrels.
We should remember they're small communities, so they're going to have inevitably border disputes, but they have to devise a method that allows it to be decisive and quick and allows these farmers to get back to their own farms without anybody getting annihilated. And that's what hoplite warfare does.
The main goal of ancient Greek warfare was to be quick and decisive. And that has been the aim of Western military commanders ever since. The weight of hoplite arms and armor, coupled with the heat of the Greek summer, meant battles were short. Because both sides had to get back to their crops, battles needed to be decisive. On the day of battle, the hoplite would get up early to prepare his equipment. Often, fathers and sons would fight side by side. Most hoplites had a servant to help prepare for battle.
The hoplite soldiers of Greece were people who wore heavy armor, and the word hoplite itself derives from the word hopla, which means gear. They had a rather cumbersome helmet that didn't have a lot of openings for sight or hearing, and we know that they had a breastplate of 35 pounds, and it would be solid plate at least in the first century or two of their appearance. They had greaves, they had a small secondary sword, but most importantly this enormous 3-foot wooden shield out of hardwood, perhaps oak, and the entire ensemble may have weighed in at about 70 pounds.
The hoplite chose heavy armor, few provisions, and heavy lethal weapons.
Hoplite warrior, I think, would be a terrifying thing to look at. He would have not only his armor from his neck to his waist, he'd have greaves on his shin, he'd have this enormous shield and some type of insignia, which could be horrific in itself. It would have this crest that would bob back and forth, what we see in the Iliad that frightens small children.
With weapons and armor at the ready, the hoplites formed a long line, several men deep, a phalanx.
Actually, as an individual fighter, it's true a hoplite would probably be quite vulnerable because his shield is round and it would probably not protect his entire body well. Also, his sword is very short. It's a secondary weapon. You take that soldier and you put him in a line, perhaps a half a mile long and 8 men deep, and then those disadvantages become advantages. And his shield protects people. He wears it on the left. It protects person on his left. He seeks protection on the man on his right. Ranks 1, 2, and 3, their spears reach the enemy, and nobody can go through that line of pikes. It's like no other formation.
In Greek, the word phalanx means roller. In a hoplite battle, the key to victory was to keep the phalanx rolling. A phalanx that kept moving forward stood a good chance of victory. If it stopped or broke ranks, its soldiers were doomed. The hoplites had a simple strategy for keeping a phalanx together. In the front row were middle-aged, battle-hardened soldiers. Behind them were the youngest, least experienced men. And at the rear, the oldest, battle-hardened veterans kept the young ones moving forwards, at sword point if necessary. The style of warfare dictated the battlefield. For the phalanx to keep its shape, hoplites had to fight on level ground. And since the Greek way of war was governed by rules, the battlefield was agreed on in advance.
Where the battle is fought is kind of ironic because usually the disputes arise not over flat, good farmland, but over borderland that's rough and is used for grazing that typically separates one Greek city-state from another. So I think what we could imagine the course of events would be something like the following. Somebody comes down from the foothills and says, the Thebans have encroached on our land. There's an assembly of Athenians. They decide that this is one time too many. They march over the pass. They take 2 or 3 days' rations in their knapsack. The Thebans know they're coming. They get to a first flat plain across the border. Both sides see each other. The musters of hoplites are complete. Each man would arrange in their preset place in the phalanx. They would look at the enemy. Sometimes they might look at the enemy for 10 minutes and charge. Sometimes it might be a half an hour, we hear it. In some cases it might be an hour. It's the type of warfare like none other in the world where people consciously must think what's going to happen to them in the next 10, 15, 20 minutes. There's no skirmishing, there's no guerrilla tactics, there's no night tactics. Chance is pretty well out of the picture. The chance is simply how tough you are and how willing you are to stand your ground.
Hoplite battle, the rules of war ensured a fair fight. Each side sent heralds to make sure the rules were observed and to agree on who had won. The ancient poet Homer described the tense moments before battle.
They made a living fence, spear to spear, shield to shield, helmet to helmet, and man to man. The spears they brandished in their strong hands were interlaced, and their hearts were set on battle. Thrusting shield against shield, they shoved and fought and killed and fell. There was no shouting, nor was there silence, but the strange noise that wrath and battle together will produce.
Inside the Phalanx, a swirl of dust, blood, and twisting bodies blinded the Hoplite. His helmet muffled all sound. He could react only to the press of men about him. Sometimes brother killed brother.
Being thus pressed and crowded together, he who had either drawn his sword or directed his lance could neither restore it again, nor put his sword up. With these weapons, they wounded their own men as they happened to come in the way, and they were dying by mere contact with each other.
When one side broke through an opponent's phalanx, the end was swift. Those who turned and fled were cut down from behind.